I really shouldn't be saying welcome back to Fire Emblem Month anymore, especially if you keep watching the first 8 seconds of each of these videos. But I digress. Throughout the course of this month, I have been talking about Fire Emblem games that I still enjoy to this day, and some that are some of my favorite games of all time. However, it's not always the case. This particular game being by far the weakest in the entire franchise. Is it a bad game? Not even close, but it does leave a lot to be desired. And this particular game is Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon. Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon is the 11th installment of the Fire Emblem series, the first to appear on the Nintendo DS, and is a remake of the first Fire Emblem game, Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light. Many fans claim this game to be the weakest in the entire franchise, since it wasn't as in-depth in regards to everything like previous titles. Do I feel the same way? Let's find out. Shadow Dragon follows the events of the original game and takes place in the continent of Arcanea. In ancient times, the Dark Dragon Medeus led a reign of terror over the continent of Arcanea, before an unlikely hero named Henri used the mythical falchion and the mystical fire emblem in order to defeat Medeus and restore peace to the continent. Even with all that going on, a century has passed, and Medeus is resurrected by sorcerer Garneth of the Kingdom of Grawl, who wants to reclaim his empire and his former territories. This leads to the events of Shadow Dragon, where the Kingdom of Altea, the birthplace of our protagonist Marth, is under attack by Garneth's forces. Marth is then forced into exile to the Kingdom of Talis, leaving her own sister behind. And several years later, together with the help of the kingdom's Princess Sheeta and a small band of soldiers, Marth must return back with the legendary falchion to Altea and defeat Medeus once again. The story is pretty basic since it does follow the events of the first game. It's not bad per se, it's just okay. I mean, there are some good moments, but the story itself isn't really anything special or to write home about. The game features the main core gameplay of the franchise, but it does introduce some new features that help make it stand out. For starters, some gameplay mechanics like the weapon triangle that weren't introduced in the original game were included into Shadow Dragon. Players can also directly swap a unit's class using the class swap feature, so think of it as like reclassing. So for example, a knight can reclass into a mercenary. Although, there are limitations in how many of one particular class you can have, and special classes like lords and thieves cannot reclass. So yeah, reclassing was introduced in Shadow Dragon. Though unlike in Fire Emblem Awakening, which I'll get to later, reclassing in Shadow Dragon is balanced out by increasing and decreasing stats depending on the class. In the middle of battle, players can save their game by moving a unit onto a special save point, which is found on the map and is usually located before a boss fight or a similarly dangerous event. You use this to save in battle, but you can only do it once. Unlike the chapter saves where you can save as many times as you want. The suspend feature from previous games has also been included into Shadow Dragon and accounted for. While I necessarily don't use the save point in battle, I can understand why people would find it useful. And for the first time in the series, players can battle each other online via the Nintendo Wi-Fi connection. That's also now dead. These battles employ up to 5 characters from your single-player campaign file. Battles take place on multiplayer exclusive maps and allow for free movement, unlike the Link Arena in the previous games. and only 2 players can battle at a time. Not to mention that Fog of War can be toggled on or off, and a time and turn limit is also active. The victor is rewarded with one of these special cards in which you can use in battle to get special effects, and those can be toggled on or off as well. The Wi-Fi connection is also used to access an online shop, where players can purchase items using currency obtained in the main campaign, in addition to loaning units to other players to assist with the single-player campaign. Though I haven't used the Wi-Fi for multiplayer battles, I have used it to access the online shop, and it is great stuff. The game's presentation and soundtrack are rather underwhelming in my eyes. They're not bad, just forgettable. Graphically speaking, Shadow Dragon is rather poorly designed. The battle animations and in-game animations just look so stiff. Though to be fair, the character portraits do look pretty good. The soundtrack is also rather underwhelming, at least compared to other games. I can't find a single piece of music in this game that I remember, with the exception of probably the main theme and the recruitment theme. Speaking of underwhelming, the characters are pretty much the same case. Since Shadow Dragon is a direct remake of the original game, the character roster is rather quantity over quality. And because of Shadow Dragon's structure, the characters are rather bland and forgettable. With that said, however, some of these units are really reliable units on the battlefield, like Marth, Sheeta, Cain, Abel, Barst, Minerva, and Tiki. But that's just about it. Remember people, we're only getting down to the nitty-gritty, as I will now explain why Shadow Dragon is by far the weakest game of the franchise in my opinion. Sure, Shadow Dragon is a great game mechanically, but it's not a great Fire Emblem game. Fire Emblem games have always managed to surprise me time and time again, as well as how each game has its own distinctive personality and makes each game stand out in the franchise. Though this isn't really the case with Shadow Dragon. In fact, they added a prologue to this game about Marth's escape, which is probably the best part about this game, since it is the only new thing in the remake, at least a part of the story. When producer Toru Narihiro was asked about Shadow Dragon, he said he wanted to shy away on massive amounts of lines and dialogue, which made the series famous in the first place. Because of this, there are no support conversations at all in Shadow Dragon, with the exception of the unique dialogue when you recruit units from enemy armies. Speaking of the characters, Shadow Dragon is the first Fire Emblem game in which I didn't really care about any of my soldiers. I mean, come on, I cared more about the Dawn Brigades more than these guys. And the reason that this game is actually like this is rather simple. Shadow Dragon is a direct remake of the original game. And by direct, I mean that everything from the original game is applied to Shadow Dragon, with the exception of the few bells and whistles, which makes the game that more painful. Overall, Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon is not a bad game, but it is by far the weakest of the franchise. I struggle to find any enjoyment of this game because of its lack of a distinct personality. Because of how bad Shadow Dragon is compared to the rest of the series, fans here in the West were wondering if we were going to get another Fire Emblem game at all. At least the next game in the franchise to be released overseas revitalized many fans' interest in Fire Emblem, but we'll get to that next time. But first, I have to review the next game that appeared on the DS, and I really wish this game was localized to America, but since the Nintendo DS was on its last legs, and with the 3DS now on the shelves, That unfortunately didn't happen.